This is a full story. Puppy wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. After my divorce, my sister introduced me to a guy who was divorced and had a son. He was pretty average looking, but his son was absolutely stunning. He looked like an old-world European prince. But there was something off with the kid. No one could quite explain what it was, but he apparently had some suicidal tendencies and needed constant supervision. My sister told me the guy worked on ships and made over $1 million a year, but he could only come home twice a year, each time for about 10 days. If we got married, all the money he earned would be sent to me as long as I could take care of his son and make sure nothing happened to him. Rocky and I met for the first time at a pizza place downstairs from my office. He was wearing a dark blue hoodie, a man close to 40 with a sturdy build and a buzz cut. His looks weren't impressive, but he was clean and well-groomed. Before I came, my sister had shown me his photo and told me the basics. Is it okay to ask why you and your ex-wife got divorced? Rocky smiled awkwardly, revealing 2 deep dimples, his teeth white and straight. To be honest, I've been married 3 times. I was shocked. My sister hadn't mentioned that. Divorcing once could be due to emotional incompatibility or long-distance issues. But 2 or 3 times? That's a whole different story. Was he abusive? Or maybe he didn't want to hand over his salary after marriage. Just looking for someone to take care of his kid? I sized up the man in front of me, 10 years older than me. He seemed gentle and kind-hearted, especially when he smiled, almost with a silly charm. My son is from my first marriage. His mother's family was well off. Back then, I was only making a little over $3,000 a month, and her parents introduced her to a businessman. So, he was forced into divorce. He rubbed his hands together, his tan skin turning a bit red. His eyes were fixed on the plate in front of him, too embarrassed to look at me. Normally, a man in his position would hate his ex-wife's family for treating him like that. Now that he's financially stable, he should feel proud and think they were blind. But as I looked at him, I didn't see any resentment. In fact, he seemed to feel self-conscious when talking about it. Could his next 2 divorces be related to his ex-wife? Was there unresolved drama? Maybe even financial entanglements? Your first wife must have been very beautiful. I've seen your son's picture. He looks like he's mixed race. I didn't dare ask directly about the other 2 divorces. Judging by the situation, there could be some complicated love story. Rocky smiled awkwardly and said, "People do say she's pretty. Don't you think so?" He shook his head. I don't have much sense of aesthetics, and I'm a bit face-blind. I don't really focus on looks. The food arrived, and we ate a little. Then I asked him again, "So what about the other 2 divorces? Tell me, let me see if it's something I can handle." His face, which had been flushed, turned a little pale. His lips trembled, and he bit into his food, half of his teeth sinking into his own mouth. My son, he hesitated for a long time before finally putting down his chopsticks with a sigh. There's no point hiding it. My son has some psychological issues. I know, suicidal tendencies, right?
Yeah.
He nodded. He needs someone to watch him constantly. But now he's in his rebellious phase and really hates being watched. Rocky really wasn't picky about women. My sister had already told him my basic situation. How about we take some time to get to know each other? I was quite satisfied with him. Besides his high salary that would allow me to stay home and write, there weren't many men who, after a divorce, would reflect on their own faults. He gave off that silly yet reliable vibe, the kind of man who could hold a family together. Honestly, I think you're great, someone who wants to live a steady, ordinary life. He lowered his eyes and smiled shyly. That's when I noticed he had long eyelashes, with an upward curve at the corners of his eyes. Despite being nearly 40, his face had few wrinkles apart from his sun-kissed skin. Just from one meal, how can you tell? I chuckled. He handed me a napkin, scanned the bill, and started explaining his thoughts. Your hands are clean, no long nails. You speak without aggression, and you consider things from both sides. Also, when you complimented my ex-wife, you didn't seem emotional. Then he waved his phone screen at me. It was the payment page. $79. We hadn't established a relationship yet, so splitting the bill was expected. No need for further explanation. I got it from his action. I immediately took out my phone to add him and send the money, but he put his phone away, rubbing his hands together again. This place is owned by a friend of mine. He said it's the first time someone's brought a date here and eaten so much Sichuan food without spending over $100. For someone who seemed so silly, his attention to detail surprised me. I couldn't help but reassess him. How about this? If you're okay with it, I'll take you to meet my son in the next couple of days and see if you can handle it. After saying this, he hesitated, looking a bit nervous, with his brow furrowed. He couldn't help but emphasize again. I really think you're great. If it works out, I'll give you $1 million as a bride price and another $500 $500,000 for you and my son to spend. Let's do it tomorrow. It's the weekend. After exchanging contacts with Rocky, I went back to the office and told my sister about the situation. Everything seemed fine, but Rocky's nervousness whenever he mentioned his son left me puzzled. With his financial situation around here, no one would care about a son, let alone two. Sure, the kid had issues, but he was in high school, so there wasn't much to worry about in terms of daily life, just needed more supervision. Sis, how much do you know about Rocky's son? Does he reject having a stepmother? My sister, like Rocky, couldn't explain the situation clearly. He's not exactly against it, but you'll know when you meet him. He's a bit rebellious, but don't be scared. Does he hit people? No, he doesn't get physical. I'm in no rush to get married, but I'm really curious about how a suicidal 15-year-old high school student managed to scare away 2 previous stepmothers. The next morning, I bought some gifts, and Rocky drove us to a villa in the best part of the city. This is a rich neighborhood, right? We bought it for Jack's schooling. It was pretty cheap back then. Jack? Yeah. His grandpa gave him the name. The car stopped in the villa's garage, and Rocky led me inside. It's a bit messy. I cleaned yesterday, but I'm not that meticulous. I stood by the shoe cabinet at the entrance, put on the new women's slippers Rocky handed me, and looked around the house. It was fairly clean, but things weren't neatly arranged, a bit cluttered. Jack refuses to hire a housekeeper, so you might have to tidy up occasionally. He only takes care of his own room. High schoolers don't get much rest, and since it was the weekend, Jack wasn't up yet. Rocky and I sat on the sofa chatting while I asked him a few times about Jack's suicide attempts. Rocky couldn't say for sure. His summary was, no warning, no conflicts, and Jack wouldn't talk about it afterward, so I don't let him close his door at home. I even removed the locks on his bedroom and bathroom doors. And there are cameras installed everywhere in the house. He quickly waved his hands, afraid I might mind, and explained, there are no cameras in our room, just his. Even so, it made me a bit uncomfortable. A 15-year-old is not a child, and having no private space, no privacy at all under constant family surveillance, sounds suffocating. Doesn't he mind? He's quite obedient. If I say it enough, he listens. I was wondering what kind of trouble such a well-behaved kid could cause when I heard slow footsteps upstairs. I looked up to see a boy in a white t-shirt and gray shorts rubbing his slightly long messy hair, eyes half closed as he walked down the stairs. Just like in the photo, this kid was exceptionally good-looking. Unlike his dad's suntan skin, he had cool, fair skin. And aside from the color of his eyes, he looked like a young European prince. Your hair's getting long. You should get it cut. Doesn't look like a student. Got it, I'll cut it this afternoon. Rocky, who had been shy and reserved with me, instantly took on the tone of a parent in front of his son. Then he felt it wasn't right to embarrass the kid in front of me, so he quickly forced a smile and said, this is your. He paused awkwardly. I jumped in, Haley, just call me Aunt Haley. Aunt Haley. Teenagers can be rebellious, especially with stepmothers, so I expected some resistance, at least cold glares. But Jack was well-mannered, more composed than Rocky, and his gaze lingered on me, particularly on my face. Are you going to marry my dad, Aunt Haley? At noon, we booked a private room at a hotel. Rocky went to order the food while Jack sat across from me, one hand propping up his chin, his eyes downcast as he looked at me. His eyelashes were long and thick, just like Rocky's. Yes, we get along well. Today, we mainly want to hear your thoughts. I don't agree, but without someone to watch me, he can't focus on his job, so I have no choice but to agree. You're straightforward. I appreciate that. You'd better be prepared. It's my home, and I won't change my lifestyle just because someone new moves in. Unlike when Rocky was around, Jack's obedience disappeared, replaced by sharpness and assertiveness. But still, was this enough to scare off 2 stepmothers? How's the conversation going? Rocky returned, holding 3 bottles of yogurt, placing one in front of each of us. He looked at Jack and said, your Aunt Haley is a good person. We plan to get married soon, and you. Jack stared at me with an ambiguous expression and gave a slightly eerie smile. She is nice. Some people make wrong choices for money, suffer for it, and eventually flee. Jack, all right, I'll stop. Jack opened his yogurt, took a sip, and suddenly handed the bottle he had just drunk from over to me. Rocky was about to scold him for being rude, but I calmly swapped the bottle for the unopened one in front of Rocky and took a sip from it. His provocation was obvious, but I didn't need to take the bait. On Monday, Rocky and I rushed to get our marriage license and moved my things into the new house. Rocky should have left for sea long ago, but he had been delaying because he couldn't find someone to take care of Jack. Any further delay and it would mess with his work season. Most of the time, there's cell service on the ship, but there are areas without it. I'll let you know in advance. Jack doesn't need much from you, just check on him every 2 hours, especially at night. If he does anything out of line, just tell me. I'll call and scold him. He's still obedient, so don't be scared. On the way to the port, Rocky carefully explained everything in detail. The heavy luggage he was carrying kept slipping down, and when I offered to help, he refused, waving me off. You wouldn't think he was a man who earned over $1 million a year. He worked diligently like a dock worker with a hard life. I've memorized everything you said. Stay safe on the ship, and I'll keep an eye on Jack. Don't worry. The rumbling of the large fishing boat faded as it sailed away from the shore. I watched the horizon and suddenly felt a pang of sympathy. $1 million is no small sum for those of us earning $3,000 a month. But it's money he risked his life for in dangerous waters year after year. I had seen his wardrobe, just laborer's clothes. Washed so many times they were faded and misshapen, but he wore them until they tore. Jack must have noticed all of this, so even during his rebellious phase, he remained obedient in front of Rocky. But how would he act now that Rocky was gone? I couldn't help but ponder this on the way back. Day students don't have evening study sessions. When I got home, I saw a warm light from the second floor from afar. Jack had come home from school. Just as I opened the door and stepped in, he walked down from the second floor. Maybe he was going to get some ice water from the fridge, as he was holding a transparent water pitcher. It was supposed to be a normal encounter, but when I saw him, I was so startled that I froze in place, almost turning around to run away. Jack wasn't wearing anything. He was completely naked at home. He's 15, not a little kid anymore. Though his frame still had the slenderness of youth, he was tall and well-built. If you didn't know his age, you could easily mistake him for a 20-year-old. Sorry. I'll wait for you to go back to your room. I quickly turned around, facing away from him, silently blaming myself for coming home at the wrong time. Maybe I should have messaged him in advance, so he could prepare for my return. It's fine. Unexpectedly, a casual chuckle came from behind me. Unlike me, Jack didn't seem nervous at all. His slippers calmly crossed the living room as he walked to the fridge and filled the pitcher with ice water. You'll get used to it. I'm always like this at home. What? It took me a while to process what he said. Did he mean that even with his stepmother around, he liked to run around the house naked? Being new here, I naturally felt uneasy. With the tension of being a guest in someone else's home, I was well aware that I was an outsider. Well, I'll try not to look then. Go ahead, it's not like I'll charge you. Hurts my eyes. That must have upset him, as he didn't respond, and his footsteps up the stairs were a bit quicker. Once I heard him enter his room, I finally turned around to change into my slippers, and quickly sent Rocky a message. Your son just gave me a bodybuilding show. He seems pretty confident in his body, which is a good thing. If the internet connection was stable, Rocky could see everything in the house through the cameras, except for our bedroom. 5 minutes later, I received a reply. Don't worry, I'll talk to him. 15 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. Jack stood at the door, his face stern, one hand propping up the doorframe, leaning in slightly, his teeth gritted as he said, "You told my dad on me?" Not really. He can see it on the cameras too. At least he knew to come back wearing shorts to confront me. I felt somewhat relieved. Wear whatever you want. I'm just sharing my life with my husband. Did he say something to you? The tension between us was palpable. Knowing he was in the wrong, Jack gave me a quick sideways glance, then turned around and walked away without a word. Are you having dinner? Just seeing you makes me full. That's great. You should take a few more looks, so I don't have to cook. Following Rocky's instructions, I checked on Jack every 2 hours, to make sure that if something happened, it could be caught within the window of time for intervention. Jack was clearly annoyed by this routine, but he had promised Rocky he wouldn't close his door. So, even if he was unhappy, he had to bear it. During the day, he went to school, and I stayed at home, setting up a traditional style study in one of the empty rooms. Then I nestled in there to write. I took a picture of the study I set up and sent it to Rocky. His hearty laughter came through the phone from the sea, carrying the warmth of the sun and the salty sea breeze, instantly lifting my spirits. I've always liked traditional Chinese-style studies, but never had the time to set one up. Can I borrow yours for some tea and incense when I get back? When my husband returns, we'll enjoy some elegance together. Sounds perfect. If you need help moving anything heavy, you can either hire someone or ask Jack to help. Don't strain yourself. He gave me instructions in a detailed and considerate manner, and I responded briefly. but with the poor signal, we didn't chat for long. After ending the video call, I turned around to see Jack standing in the doorway of the study, still in his school uniform, leaning against the doorframe. He looked at me coldly, let out a mocking laugh, and then turned and walked back to his room. "Are you going to have dinner tonight?" I followed him, and he was in the middle of taking off his school uniform, giving me a sideways glance before casually continuing to undress. "It's fine, you can starve me if you want." I watched as he finished taking off his school uniform. One hand rested on the only piece of clothing left, his black shorts, hovering between taking them off or not, as if challenging me. I couldn't help but find it a bit amusing. "I wouldn't dare. Even without you dying, the resentment would already be heavy enough. What do you want to eat? Tomato scrambled eggs, minced pork noodles, and a side of stir-fried pork? How about that?" For some reason, those dishes seemed to trigger something in him. A flash of surprise crossed his eyes, and then his expression shifted into a flustered frown. He quickly covered it up, and I didn't ask any further. These were his favorite dishes. I had asked Rocky in advance. I wasn't trying to pick on Jack. On the contrary, I wanted to win him over, hoping that we could get along in the future. But clearly, it wouldn't be easy. There was a high wall in his heart. He seemed obedient and at ease, but underneath, he was suppressive and defensive, like a volcano constantly heating up, just waiting to erupt at any moment. We were often silent, and when we spoke, it was filled with sarcasm. After dinner, I would go to my room to bathe and sleep. Jack would stay up studying until around 2 a.m., then curl up on his small, all-black bed, sleeping like a little abandoned kitten. This quiet coexistence continued for 1 or 2 months. As a high school student, besides one meal at night, he didn't need me for anything else. I had a lot of free time. Since I knew how tiring school was for him, I offered to do his laundry and tidy his room, but he always looked at me with disgust and revulsion, saying, "If you touch my stuff, I'll throw it all away immediately." So, I decided to leave him alone, and let him come to me if he ever needed anything. On my first day here, following Rocky's advice, I set an alarm to go off every 2 hours. Normally, it was the alarm that woke me, but not this time. It wasn't even the middle of the night yet. I had only dozed off for a little while, my sleep restless. In my dreams, I kept hearing faint, agonized screams. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but as I gradually woke up, I realized the sounds were coming from inside the house. Was Jack watching a horror movie to relieve stress? Listening closely, I heard strange, labored breathing mixed in. I was so sleepy that, if it had been any other kid, I would have just gone back to sleep. But with Jack, I was worried something might happen. So, I got dressed and went out to check. What I saw almost left a lifelong scar on my mind. The door to Jack's room was still open, with only his study lamp on. On his computer screen, there was some extremely graphic and disturbing content playing. A pitiful woman screaming in agony. And in front of that grotesque scene, Jack was curled up in his chair, his back to the door, legs propped up on the desk, engaging in something no one should have to witness. He seemed to know I was there, but remained unfazed. I could faintly hear him let out a mocking laugh from his throat. Rocky hadn't given him any private space, and Jack had promised not to close the door. Even now, he hadn't. I was horrified, and I should have turned and left, but my feet felt like they were nailed to the floor, and I stood there, frozen like a block of wood. It wasn't until nearly 10 minutes later, when he was done, that he finally spoke. Without turning around. "Not even 2 hours yet, huh? Did I scare you awake?" Your computer was a bit loud." I had no idea how I managed to stay calm and talk to him. Catching someone in that situation should have been more awkward, but instead, I felt a chill run through me. Because of the kind of videos he was watching, I finally understood why Rocky's previous 2 wives left. Why they walked away from a life of ease, with hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, a 15-year-old boy, watching violent, extreme content to relieve his desires. He found excitement in such gruesome scenes. It was terrifying. What stood before me wasn't just a stepson, but a potential violent criminal in the making, someone who might one day wield a butcher's knife. Why do you like watching this? He was surprised that I didn't run away in panic, but it was only for a moment. After zipping up his pants, he turned to look at me, his face still flushed with a hint of madness. "Don't you think there are some people in this world who deserve to be treated like that? Too bad I can't do it myself. If I could, I'd be even harsher." The night wind rattled the window that wasn't fully shut, the whistling of the wind sounding like cries from the underworld, casting an eerie shadow on Jack's face, half lit and half dark. "I kind of understand how you vent your emotions." I couldn't believe I had the nerve to walk into his room and sit down on the carpet beside his bed. Looking up at his slightly puffy puzzled expression. Could you tell me who your target is? Of course, I'll keep it confidential. TCH. He scoffed, raising his hand to point at the camera above my head. Confidential? I have no secrets. He had no privacy. To him, every moment was like running naked. Did you know? I hate women. All women. His gaze locked onto me, filled with intense malice. His fingers gripped the edge of the table so tightly they turned white, and he ground out each word with force. They all deserve to die. Surrounded by his overwhelming darkness, I felt a moment of confusion. He said, all women, but didn't use the word you. It meant I wasn't on his deserve to die list, at least not yet. Because of your biological mother? You feel like she abandoned you, so you hate her? Did your stepmothers ever abuse you? This time, Jack didn't answer. His deep eyes hid some unknown storm. Calm and terrifying. Nothing like a teenager. When I first saw him come downstairs naked, there was a faint white scar on his thin chest, running from his shoulder down to his abdomen. Looking closely now, he had many scars. They had mostly healed, leaving faint white marks that blended into his pale skin. Go back to sleep. Why are you talking so much in the middle of the night? He seemed to acknowledge what I said, turning his head away, no longer staring at me. His long lashes dropped, forming a protective barrier. I'm worried you'll commit suicide. Then will you stay and sleep with me? No, no, no. I'm even more afraid you'll kill me. I quickly got up, waving my hand as I left. At the door, I hesitated and added, I'm going back. If you want to talk, you can call me. There are no cameras in my room. Rocky didn't tell me the whole truth. Or maybe it's my fault for not digging deeper. So I was easily brushed off with a couple of sentences. There must be more issues between him and the two women who came after. There was a time difference since he was at sea. When I messaged him, he was still working, and it took him an hour to reply once he was free. Rocky didn't want to bring up these things, but under my persistence, he finally revealed what had happened. After his divorce from Jack's mother, Rocky had a tough time. He wandered the streets with his son, often going without food. Jack was 5 years old then. His grandmother had passed away early, and his grandfather had just died. Rocky worked as a driver, hauling goods while taking care of Jack. To save on motel costs, they mostly lived in the van. In winter, the old van leaked, and Jack would frequently get sick. So, Rocky decided to visit Jack's maternal grandparents, hoping they could help look after Jack for the winter. It was the first time Jack remembered meeting his mother and grandparents. He was thrilled. He picked out his favorite outfit from a pile of old clothes and even selected snacks from the store as gifts. Rocky thought Jack was so sensible, and that surely his grandparents would be happy to see him. Maybe it would even rekindle the bond with his mother, allowing them to stay in touch more. But what happened was unexpected. Not only did they reject them, but they also denied Jack's existence, refusing to acknowledge that he was their daughter's child. They stomped on the gifts Jack had carefully chosen and warned Rocky, saying, if you come looking for trouble again, we'll sell the boy. That day, 5-year-old Jack sat silently in the van amidst the cargo. That same day, Rocky, lost in guilt, got into a car accident. After a long time, a small Jack crawled out of the wreckage, enduring the pain of a fractured shoulder, trying helplessly to pull his unconscious father from the van. But he was too little, unable even to open the twisted car door. Not knowing who to turn to, he ran back to the home of the woman who had just rejected him, pleading for them to help save Rocky. Crying, but too scared to sob loudly, he kept saying, I'll repay you, I promise. I only have my dad left. But it was bad timing. His mother's new husband, a rich man, had just arrived to pick her up. Panicked, his grandparents tried to shoo him away, but when he wouldn't leave, his grandfather struck him with a chair and grabbed his broken arm, dragging him out of the neighborhood and tossing him into a foul-smelling ditch. No one knows how Jack, who couldn't swim, managed to crawl out of that ditch, or how much pain he endured. All that's known is that he went around begging for help until someone finally helped save Rocky's life. Since then, the words a mom and a mother never left Jack's mouth again. It's my fault too, for what happened after, Rocky said. He thought if there was someone at home to take care of Jack, he could afford to rent a cheaper place, and the mother and son wouldn't have to live out of the van anymore. Rocky was handsome in his younger days, like Jack, and attracted a lot of attention. Someone introduced him to a woman who had returned from a big city, and without thinking much, he agreed to marry her. Did she abuse Jack? I've seen a lot of old scars on him, I asked. Yes, but Jack never told me. Jack was just in elementary school then. He didn't understand what marriage meant, only that when the woman was around, Rocky would have a hot meal waiting for him when he got home, and when she was gone, he wouldn't worry as much. She acted one way in front of me and another in front of Jack, Rocky continued. I didn't notice anything until Jack was severely injured, bleeding non-stop, and had to run to a neighbor for help. The man next door took him to the hospital. That's when I found out she used to be involved in shady activities in the city, and after being exposed, she couldn't find anyone to marry. So she settled for me out of desperation. Settled with a man she didn't care for and had to look after his baggage. You can imagine how much pent-up resentment a woman like her might have, someone used to a more luxurious life. After that, Rocky found work on a ship. An older worker, seeing how hardworking and honest he was, agreed to mentor him. But how could he feel comfortable leaving for months at a time without anyone to care for Jack? The woman had heard about the high pay for ship work and, unwilling to divorce, begged Rocky to give her another chance, promising never to hurt Jack again. Then the catch wasn't good that year. The ship had issues, and we missed the season, so none of us made much money. We came home broke and beaten. When you got back, did she ask for a divorce? She went crazy, smashing everything in the house. If I hadn't stopped her, she would have thrown a whole pot of boiling water on Jack. Rocky didn't mention much about that pot of boiling water, but later, when I saw him changing clothes, I noticed a large burn scar on his back. What about the woman after her? What happened? I wanted Rocky to finish the story, but a storm suddenly kicked up where he was, and the connection was cut off, like sea spray being swept away by the wind. Do you want to know how my last stepmother left? A sudden voice startled me. I never closed my door all the way when I rested, always leaving a crack so I could keep an ear out for Jack. Jack was standing in the doorway now, his tone filled with mockery and sarcastic laughter. Clearly having eavesdropped for quite a while, I'll tell you directly. After all, I'm the one who knows the real story. Although he had been listening to my phone call, he didn't barge into the room uninvited. Instead, he politely knocked on the door twice. "Can I come in?" "You can," I replied. After my approval, Jack pushed open the door. He was holding a cold can of soda, lazily curling up in the chair next to my bed. "You've been in my house for almost a month now, right?" "A little over a month, I think." "I remember you've had 2 exams, and your teachers say you've made great progress. They think you might make it into the advanced class next year. You joined my class's parent group chat too?" Jack laughed in a way that was hard to read, filled with resistance and disgust. He turned his head slightly to hide the emotions flashing through his eyes, and his eyelashes trembled for a moment. I pretended not to notice. "Your dad's not around, so it's my responsibility to take care of these things. Someone has to reply, received it in the group, right?" The quiet night air was occasionally broken by the sound of wind rattling the window, casting messy shadows of tree branches against the glass. "She was like you too, introduced by someone else. She used to work at a local repair center." Jack stayed silent for a long time, slowly tilting his head back to stare at the plain ceiling light. "By then, we had a bit of money and had already bought this house. My dad gave her the same deal he gave you. If she could take care of me, he'd give her all his salary." At first, the woman was very different. She was eager to please, showering both Rocky and Jack with attention, bringing warmth to their drifting lives. That was probably Jack's happiest time. Because of that warmth, Jack's academic performance skyrocketed, jumping from the bottom of the class to the top. But their struggles didn't end there. That happiness lasted less than 2 years. One day, Jack came home from school and overheard her on the phone with Rocky, saying some pretty harsh things, upset because Rocky hadn't made as much money that year. Just over $800,000, which wasn't what he had promised her. By then, Jack had a solid understanding of money, and he didn't think they needed to spend that much. So, he began secretly observing the woman's spending habits. Using his phone, he looked up the items in her room and found not only luxury goods worth tens of thousands, but also numerous receipts. Over 1,000 for nails, 2,000 for a haircut, even 5,000 for a meal, and tens of thousands for cosmetic surgery. Jack was furious and immediately told Rocky, but Rocky, being a laid-back guy, didn't get angry. He always liked to think of others' feelings. He figured the woman was just getting carried away because they suddenly had more money. Like someone with a lottery winner mindset. "It's okay, son. When people come into money, they splurge a little. I've got everything set up now, and will be making more in the future." Rocky wasn't wrong. The woman, although extravagant, had always been good to Jack, never treating him poorly. So, despite being angry, Jack didn't really think much of it until his 3rd year of middle school. I was sitting on the bed reading a book. Jack suddenly stood up close to me while speaking. One leg knelt on the edge of the bed. He leaned over and stared directly into my eyes. He took my right hand and placed it on his neck. Then little by little, he moved it down to his chest and abdomen. Middle and high school is the stage of boys' development. Jack is tall and straight. Apart from the greenness of a teenager, he is clearly a man emitting light and heat. He still wanted to go further down. Realizing the danger, I panicked and withdrew my hand. She was like this, taking my hand and placing it on herself. She led me to touch her. Then she pulled down my pants. He didn't continue speaking the following words. I saw the disgusting and repellent look in his eyes. How could I not understand? That woman fell in love with her stepson and did the most inappropriate thing. She left an indelible psychological shadow on a child in the 3rd year of junior high school. Why did she leave later? Because of the scene you saw today. Because she found those tools hoarded under my bed. Because she knew that I wasn't even afraid of death. Except for this house, Rocky wouldn't give up no matter what. That woman left cursing and took away all the valuable things and ran away with her tail between her legs. Outside, it didn't know when it started to rain. The temperature in the room became very low. I looked at Jack. Just like the way he looked at me, empty, numb, without any emotion. I was listening to someone else's story. He was telling someone else's story. Why are you suddenly willing to tell me? You can pretend to be in any way you think is conducive to survival. Whether it's motherly kindness and filial piety or peaceful years. Telling you is to warn you. If you want to live well, be honest. Well, I remember. I didn't refute his targeting. I nodded faintly. Go to sleep. After the holiday, Mom will take you to take revenge. Do I need you? I can't stand being bullied. Your and your dad's style of swallowing insults can suffocate me. Jack thought I was just saying it. Unexpectedly, on the first morning of the weekend at 6 o'clock, I dragged him out of bed and took an intercity bus directly to the address where his biological mother is. You are crazy, Haley. Do I need you to help me take revenge? Please have some basic respect for your stepmother. Call me Aunt Haley. Otherwise, I'll tell your dad. If this mess isn't properly resolved, Jack's deepening hatred will always be a time bomb. God knows when it will explode. 2 grown men can be bullied like this. Really? Bame, the boss of Galaxy Foods, is the boss that Jack's biological mother remarried to. The main business is health products and low-end skin care products. Although the enterprise is not large, it makes a lot of money every year. It cheats customers, employees, and suppliers. It's full of lawsuits. I took Jack directly to Bame's rival company and asked to see their boss. The bosses of small enterprises are basically in the office except for socializing. I sent him several materials collected overnight. From him, I got the contact information of Bame and Jack's biological mother. Jack was confused throughout the whole process. It wasn't until I sent a message to his biological mother on the bus back to the city that he rubbed his just grown hair and asked, "How on earth did you find all these things?" We people in human resources have our own query system. As long as there is a photo and a name, it's enough to find a large amount of useful information in various human resources groups. In such a company, employees will definitely back up handle materials when they leave to ensure they can get the final salary after leaving. Fortunately, I not only bought the chat screenshots of Bame asking employees to deceive suppliers and customers, but also got his revealing photos with his mistress in the office. After returning home, everything was peaceful for a few days. While Jack was at school, I kept an eye on the current situation of Bame Company. Sure enough, in less than a month, the local news public account released a video. Bame's wife caught her husband having an affair in the office on the spot. The two fought in public and were both hospitalized. A few days later, Bame Company defaulted on delivery due to the termination of cooperation by suppliers. Not only did it lose its most important customer, but also had to pay a large amount of liquidated damages. The bank immediately terminated cooperation when it smelled trouble. Bame couldn't even get a loan to survive. In contrast, with Bame collapsing, the business of the rival company soared. It even took all the customers in its hands. It's only a matter of time for Bame to die. How is it? Are you relieved? I took Jack to a restaurant to improve our lives and passed all the collected information to him. Behind the steam of a large bowl of pickled fish and boiled meat, Jack lowered his eyelids and was silent for a long time. Finally, he nodded. His voice was a bit hoarse. Eat. Don't let it get cold. He didn't say words of thanks and didn't change his confrontational attitude when talking to me. But at home, he would wear loose home clothes and no longer wander around in just shorts. Don't I need to get information about your 2 stepmothers from your dad anymore? Send it to me. What are you up to again? I'm bored. Looking for some excitement. It can be seen that Jack is hating deep down, even though it's all in the past. He seems to find me annoying on the surface, but at night, he still sends all the information about those 2 women to my phone. Jack's first stepmother doesn't need revenge at all. I asked someone to take a video and send it to him. It was a dark and damp room less than 30 square meters. A 40-year-old woman looked like she was in her 50s. She sat on the bed haggardly and forced out a smile at the camera and made a charming gesture. The person taking the video asked, "How much?" She said, 40. Are you sick? I've been treated. I'm cured. Really? 30 is also fine. Don't leave in a hurry. The woman's bed was in a mess. It didn't look like she was cured at all, even through the screen. It seemed as if one could smell the disgusting smell in the room. She finally paid the price for her choice and embarked on the road of no return that seemed like sugar, but was actually full of glass shards. Jack, do you believe that evil is rewarded? I looked at Jack, who was lying by the riverbank with empty and dazed eyes. He moved his lips, but didn't answer. Looking into the distance at the orange-red setting sun in the sky, it was like watching a song and dance that was about to end. It doesn't matter. You will believe it. I sent him another document. This document is the current situation of his second stepmother. A woman who originally had a monthly salary of $3,000 suddenly got an annual income of $1 million. Her quality of life was rapidly raised. Luxury brands, high-end delicacies, perfect beauty and plastic surgery, magnificent residences. When the plane was soaring 10,000 meters in the air and suddenly ran out of fuel, there was only an inevitable fall. In just over a year, that woman's credit cards and all kinds of online loans exploded. She owed more than $1,080,000. Her private photos were sent everywhere. She was also beaten and hospitalized by debt collectors many times. Jack, sometimes hatred doesn't need extreme means to be resolved. Although you have long lost contact, they are all silently watching you. You living well is more painful for them than killing them. Don't preach to me. Then let's talk about something practical. Your dad will come back early this year. On New Year's Day, we will go to the Pacific Ocean to pick him up. We will play by the sea for a few days before going home. When children and other families hear that their dads are coming home early and the whole family can go out and play together, they must be beaming with joy. But Jack looked worried. He casually uttered and didn't eat much for dinner. Not only him, when I video chatted with Rocky at night, the man on the other side also smiled very reluctantly. The whole person was like an old ship washed by the sea. He frowned listlessly. His words were all careful and pleasing. How long can you rest this time? Maybe, for a long time. Until the beginning of the year. He choked in his throat. The corners of his eyes were a bit red. It wasn't very obvious on his wheat-colored skin. The smile he forced out was uglier than crying. What wrong have you suffered? None. Who can make me suffer wrong on the ship? It's just that the wind and waves are a bit stronger. Then it's settled. Jack and I will go to the sea to pick you up on New Year's Day. Oh, good. He absent-mindedly agreed twice. Making an excuse to go out of the cabin to take a look, he cut off the video. For a while after that, the father and son were exactly the same, both like eggplants beaten by frost. Jack's tone of rebutting me even became soft. Occasionally, he would help me take care of the hygiene of the public area. When passing by a fried chicken shop on the way home, he would also bring me chicken racks. Seriously, the attitudes of you father and son are like being caught red-handed while going whoring in a group. Jack bit the chopsticks so hard that it creaked. Haley, can you say something proper? Call me mom. There is no word mom in my dictionary. Give up on that thought. In a flash, it was before New Year's Day. I packed a few thick winter clothes and daily necessities. Jack took 2 days off in advance. The two of us dragged our suitcases and went to the port to take a cheap small yacht booked in advance. According to the plan, we will meet Rocky, who is supplying the fishing boat at the nearest port outside. Then we will take the fishing boat he drives to return. Experience the life on the fishing boat. Rocky was absent-minded during this period, and the signal was not very good. It wasn't until we got on the small yacht and sent him a message that he woke up and sent us a video. Jack, Haley, you really set off?
Yeah.
We're on the yacht. Remember we said we would pick you up at sea? I waved with Jack on this side of the video. Rocky forced a smile and wiped his face. Why don't you guys have a good time? Then take the yacht back later. Life on the fishing boat is very hard. I'm afraid. This time we are here to experience the hardship, right, Jack? I patted Jack on the shoulder. Ignoring the he gave when turning his head, I continued to say to Rocky, the child wants to see his dad. I want to see my husband. What are we afraid of hardship? Rocky on the other end of the video kept rubbing his face and hands. A man in his late 30s, smiling like a shy and timid fool. After smiling, he quickly fell into melancholy again. The corners of his eyes began to turn red again. There seemed to be something stuck in his throat. He kept making swallowing movements. Seeing his appearance, Jack beside blinked, got up and said he was going to the bathroom. He ran away like fleeing. Then okay, I won't talk to you anymore. You're busy. Call us when you dock. The sea breeze in winter carried a salty and cool feeling. 3 days later, we finally met Rocky at a small port. He was wearing a dark green raincoat. He took me and Jack to eat a meal of grilled fish in the nearest restaurant. When preparing to board the ship, he took off the raincoat and gave it to me and carefully fastened it for me. It's windy outside. The umbrella can't hold up. Don't get caught in the rain and catch a cold. It's just a few steps. Besides, why aren't you too afraid of catching a cold? We two are tough. We won't catch a cold. Rocky is more than 10 years older than me. He takes care of me more carefully than he takes care of Jack. There was a gap in the wooden pedal for boarding the ship. He was afraid that I would step in it. He insisted on carrying me on his back. The crew members on the ship laughed at him. Rocky can't wait to treat his new wife like a treasure. Although it was a joke, after laughing, the faces of several crew members became dejected again. Some sighed faintly when walking away. Some shook their heads while wiping their faces. What's wrong with everyone? We are going home for reunion soon. Why does everyone seem so sad? No, nothing. It's just that everyone is tired. You don't think too much. Life on the fishing boat is not as good as on a yacht, but Rocky has his own small single room. Before coming to pick us up, he had tidied it up clean and neatly. Jack went to squeeze into the dormitory with the crew members and left the independent space for us. We got caught in the rain when boarding the ship. Rocky was changing clothes in a corner. The water droplets on his hair slipped down along his tightly muscled back and stopped at the small of his back. Like a vessel holding wine slightly tilted, pouring the mellow wine into the man's hidden space below. I'll help you wipe it later. I got up and took the towel in his hand and rubbed the skin on his back. It was at this time that I saw the old scald on his back that had already healed and countless scars of various sizes. The steaming heat from the man rolled over, bringing a reassuring breath. I stroked those wounds and asked him, did it hurt a lot at that time? No, it was okay. Unlike Jack, he seemed to have no complaints no matter what he had experienced. He never complained. He just lived this not-so-peaceful life silently. Okay. You rest first. I'll come back as soon as I finish handling things. His back tensed up and stiffened. Suddenly, he held my hand, quickly put on his clothes, and ran out of the cabin like fleeing. I only saw a blush on his wheat-colored skin. Even the tips of his ears were red. I couldn't help secretly smiling for a long time. It wasn't until I was half asleep and half awake that Rocky finally came back. The wind and waves at night were very strong. The fishing boat undulated and swayed. He hugged me from behind, rested his head on my shoulder, and wrapped us tightly with a quilt. Like many couples who met through matchmaking, there is a lack of an emotional foundation between us. It's more about a first impression and a bit of favorable feeling based on weighing the pros and cons. So being close together is not so intimate. But after being close for a long time, some changes occur naturally. His breathing became heavier and heavier. As if afraid of being discovered, he turned over and faced away from me. I quite like you, Rocky. You are also very worthy of being liked. I turned over and hugged his waist and asked, what about you? What do you think of me? Very good. I like you very much. He didn't expect me to be still awake. His tone was a bit panicked. He wanted to turn around and hug me, but he hesitated and was reluctant to get close. I don't know what his concerns are. There is a hint of disappointment in my heart. I am not overly lustful, but I also care about whether I am attractive in front of my husband. There is nothing wrong with Rocky's body, but he refuses to have an intimate relationship with me. This is a great blow to me. We have both been divorced. We are not little girls who need to remain chaste. Even if we were, we are now legally married. Go to sleep. I raised my head and kissed the corner of his mouth. With a wry smile, I turned over and said nothing more. Rocky, get up quickly and have a look. The waves are rising. As they approached the national border, everyone thought they could return home safely and reunite. But unexpectedly, something happened in the early hours of the morning. The fishing boat was tossed high by the waves. The sound of the wind and waves outside was like the wailing of countless ghosts. Stay inside and don't go out. Rocky quickly wrapped himself in clothes and went to check the situation. Even though I was tossed up and down inside, I could also feel the danger at the moment. But I couldn't help. I could only silently hope that nothing bad would happen. I haven't heard that there is a storm at night. I don't know. There may be something under the ship. Be careful. Tie up the ropes well. Hurry up and finish and go back to the cabin. The waves are coming. Outside were the heart-wrenching shouts of the crew members. As the ship rose and fell in the big waves, the sounds were sometimes clear and sometimes indistinct. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, a loud noise of metal collision. I heard a voice say, "Damn it! The door of the cargo hold has been knocked open. Hoo-san, didn't you lock it? Quick, save the cargo hold. That's all our harvest." You shut up. Who has the time to spare? When we boarded the ship, Rocky took me and Jack to visit this fishing boat. We all knew where the door of the cargo hold was. I pushed open the small door and came out. Sure enough, I saw Jack tying a rope around himself, preparing to go out and close the cargo hold door. Give me the rope. I'll go. What are you messing around for? I ignored his gnashing expression and snatched the rope and tied it around myself. You can control the length of the rope for me at this end. Jack couldn't argue with me, and there was no time to argue with me. I took a lock from the wall and turned around and rushed into the wind and waves. Haley. Rocky was steering the ship above. When he saw me rushing out wearing only a single piece of clothing, he was so scared that he almost lost his soul and shouted, "Jack, quickly pull your mom back. Don't listen to him. Let out the rope." Fortunately, Jack knew my temperament and obediently held the rope at that end and slowly lowered me to a position close to the cargo hold door. The fishing boat in the wind and waves is like a madman. Even if I hold on firmly, I still get bruises all over. But in an emergency, I don't feel the pain. I struggled to pry open the hatch door and, under all kinds of strange marine fish cargo, bolted the door shut. "Okay, pull me." Just when I was about to ask Jack to pull me back, an unexpected situation occurred. A huge wave swept over and engulfed the entire fishing boat in the wave. With such a great force, Jack couldn't hold the rope at all. I was washed off the deck by the waves and fell off the ship's railing. "Mom." Amid the washing of the seawater, I heard Jack's hoarse and desperate shout. I must have heard wrong. There is no a mom in that guy's dictionary. With a wry smile, I took it as if he was calling me. I pulled the rope around my waist and tightly grasped the railing of the ship and responded, "I'm fine. Take care of yourself first. Don't be thrown out." Fortunately, there was a breathing space after the wave. Jack pulled the rope hard and pulled me back onto the deck from the side. Then some crew members who had finished handling their matters came to help. Soon they pulled me back into the cabin, after the ship passed through the wind and waves. Rocky stumbled down from above and hugged me tightly in his arms, so tightly that it seemed as if he would crush my bones. I felt the trembling of the man. His hands and feet were icy cold. When he buried his head on my shoulder, there was warmth falling into my shoulder socket. Do you know that if you fall down in this situation, you can't be retrieved? Okay, I'm fine now, aren't I? This time it's really thanks to Rocky's wife. That's us. Originally this trip. Say less. San, you idiot. Can't you be more careful? How many times have I told you not to forget to lock the door? After the wind and waves subsided, no one could sleep. 1/3 of the fish cargo in the cargo hold was lost. A crew member raised his hand and wiped his face. It seemed as if he was about to cry. Rocky sat silently beside me with his head lowered. One hand tightly held me. His eyelashes drooped, covering the look in his eyes, but not the thin redness outside. Jack buried his head in his arms. I poked his shoulder and deliberately teased him and said, "I heard someone calling Mom outside. Was it you?" He turned around and faced away from me without making a sound. "Call again. I don't mind if you call me old. Hurry up. After hearing it, I'll go catch up on sleep. Don't you think you're waiting for your dad to find you a younger and more beautiful stepmother?" Mom. Okay, Haley. If you say more, I'll go home and overturn your study." That awkward teenager finally couldn't bear it anymore. He lifted his head from his arm and glared at me angrily. But on that fair skin, his eyes were red like the morning glow in the sky. There was really no deterrence. Looking at him, he was like a pitiful dog. When I laughed, the whole cabin laughed along. When we got off the ship at the port, Rocky and the crew members went to sell the goods and divide the money. I took Jack and went to book a homestay first. It was almost dark when Rocky carried the heavy luggage, held up his mobile phone for navigation, and rode a shared bicycle over. Seeing that he was very tired, I quickly went forward with Jack to help him take the luggage. "Why didn't you take a taxi?" He held my hand in his palm, handed the luggage to Jack, and casually said, "It's not far. If you take a taxi, you still have to wait." Anyone could see that he was reluctant to spend money. The excuse was good enough. I was too lazy to expose him. "Take a break and have a meal." I ordered takeout. "I'm too lazy to go out." "Oh, good." It was very quiet here at night. The sound of the waves was neither too far nor too close, just right. It made people feel very peaceful inside. There was some light music playing in the homestay room. I wrapped myself in a quilt and wrote drafts on my mobile phone. Rocky took a long time to take a shower. When he came out, he was wrapped in a layer of water vapor. His eyebrows were drooping, and the muscles on his body didn't seem to relax. "You seem to be in a bad mood. What's wrong?" He walked to the bed. I sat up straight and hugged his waist, buried my face in his tight abdominal muscles, and rubbed it. "Don't." He gently lifted my chin and pushed me away. "I have something to tell you." Seeing his serious look, I also became nervous. In fact, this time when we went to see, he sat on the edge of the bed with his head lowered, swallowed, as if there was something stuck in his throat. That is, this time we may not have not earned much money. As he spoke, the corners of his eyes were a bit red again. His slender and rough fingers were intertwined and tightened until they turned white. He was like a prisoner confessing his crime. I know. You returned early, and you lost a lot of fish on the way. It must not be as much as before. Not only is it not as much, this time, we only divided 50 or 60,000. He was like a panicked bird trapped by hunters. He was extremely cautious and on thin ice. His whole body was tense. Suddenly, he turned sideways and tightly held my wrist. Haley, I promise this is only once. It will be better next year. At the beginning of the year, I can earn as much as before. What I promised you will not change. On the day we got married, Rocky gave me $1.5 million and promised there would be a steady income of $1 million every year for me to manage, as long as I took care of Jack. I looked at the man in front of me, watching his nervousness, his anxiety, and how cautiously he acted around me. I thought about his wardrobe full of inexpensive clothes, how he'd rather struggle to carry his luggage on a shared bike just to save a few dollars on taxi fare. Rocky, do you know how long $1.5 million can last an average family? I know. He didn't know. His hands were trembling. He didn't dare hold on to me any longer. He even lowered his head, burying it in his palms. He desperately needed that $1 million a year. He wanted to use the money to keep a relationship, to keep a family. I could almost hear the silent cry in his heart. 10 years. His spine stiffened. With normal expenses, it can last 10 years, I said. What are you worried about? Even if this half year only brings in $50,000 to $60,000, that's still an average family's normal income. I hugged him, pulling his trembling, tense body into my arms. You've already done your best, and Jack is doing well too. He's been topping his class every time in the monthly exams. You two have given me a home where I feel secure. Suddenly, there was a hurried sound of footsteps outside the door, quickly fading away. I guessed it was Jack, who had been eavesdropping. He knew Rocky would talk to me about the money. When Rocky said he would come home early, Jack didn't seem very happy, probably also worried about finances. Haley, will you leave? Rocky still hadn't relaxed, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes as he cautiously looked at me. I cupped his face, looking at the man who had been worn down by time. He must have been quite handsome in his youth. Now he was just a bit darker, with scars and the marks of age etched on his face. Rocky, don't try to buy love with money, and don't think you can trade money for a family. I like you. I've seen all your hard work and effort. If I didn't like you, or if you deliberately treated me badly, not even $1 million a year could keep me here. Haley. The night breeze by the sea was strong and cold, but the person beside me was like a furnace, radiating warmth. The fullness and sense of security of being held like this was intoxicating. Time had taken away the sunshine from Rocky's body, but he still radiated brightness from within, as if polished by the sea, now solid and heavy like a gem. The wind and rain outside howled through the night, yet he seemed to know no fatigue. Just before falling asleep, I muttered drowsily, I thought you didn't like me and didn't want to touch me. How could that be? I've always wanted to. TCH, you ran away faster than a rabbit when you were on the ship, afraid I'd eat you alive. He stayed silent for a long time until I thought he wouldn't respond. Just as I was drifting into sleep, a soft sigh reached my ears. I hadn't earned enough. I thought you'd leave, and I didn't want you to feel shortchanged. Idiot. Extra Chapter 1. The two of us were too wild that night. By the time we woke up, it was nearly afternoon the next day. I suddenly sat up, startling Rocky beside me. What's wrong? It's 3 o'clock. We haven't checked on Jack all night and half a day. When you let your guard down, that's when accidents happen. If he had thoughts of suicide during the night, this much time passing meant we wouldn't even have had a chance to save him. At my words, Rocky panicked too. We quickly threw on thick hotel robes and rushed over to Jack's room. This inn had a suite, with 2 rooms facing each other and a living room in between. Today, Jack's door was closed. In the short distance as we passed through the living room, our hearts were pounding in our throats. Luckily, the door wasn't locked, and Rocky twisted the handle open. The curtains were tightly drawn, the room dim, but we could just make out a figure lying on the soft bed, with the blanket pulled up only to his waist. Jack, wake up, don't scare your dad. Rocky rushed to the bed, almost tripping over a pair of sneakers on the floor, and threw himself on Jack, shaking him hard, calling out loudly. I quickly pulled the curtains open, letting in sunlight to check on Jack. Check his breathing. I'm calling an ambu. Shit. Was there a tsunami or an earthquake? Before I could finish, a hoarse, drowsy teenage voice grumbled from under Rocky's arms. Jack hadn't even been fully awake, but being shaken like that had turned his brain to mush. Seeing Rocky, Jack suddenly panicked, grabbing his shirt and shouting hoarsely, "Haley, did she run away? I'll go find her. I'll bring her back." He pushed Rocky aside and scrambled to get out of bed, but as soon as one leg hit the floor, he saw me standing by the window, looking at him like he was a fool. Time seemed to freeze as he stood there, awkwardly frozen by the bed. "I'm your stepmom, not a marathon runner. Thanks for thinking so highly of me." "Relax, your mom's still here," Rocky sighed in relief, patting Jack's back to calm him. Just as I was about to relax too, a shadow suddenly darted toward me, and I felt arms tighten around my waist as I was pulled into a warm embrace. Jack didn't say a word, just held me tightly. He had grown taller than Rocky, and now his body was like a mountain, his muscles taut, as if he were holding onto something precious that he'd almost lost. All right, I'm not going anywhere. We just didn't check on you last night and got scared today," I said as Rocky and I patted his back, trying to bring him out of his nightmare. Several minutes later, Jack finally let go, rubbing his face as he did, before pulling both me and Rocky into a hug, mumbling something softly. It sounded like, "Mom, we're going to stay together as a family forever." A family. That word, mom, and the 5 words, "stay together as a family," though whispered so softly it was barely audible, seemed to strike something deep inside me, touching the most tender and lonely corner of my heart. "Yeah, this is nice. Let's just keep living like this." Extra story 2. Jack has been quite promising, and he hasn't shown any signs of suicidal thoughts since. At home, he knows to dress properly and helps tidy up the house. Whenever I say something, he always retorts, but after that, he obediently listens. I enjoy bantering with him, and watching him get all flustered is amusing. Later, he got recommended to a top university and chose to major in electrical engineering. I opened a flower shop near home, and after figuring out the logistics, I switched to growing flowers in fields for wholesale. When business was good, it could bring in $400,000 to $500,000 a year. Working at sea is tough and dangerous. The year Jack graduated, I didn't let Rocky go anymore, and entrusted him with managing the fields. I stayed in the flower shop, writing articles. I thought that was pretty good, but it turned out Rocky was better at business than I was. He is honest and sincere. In less than 6 months, the number of clients doubled, and he had to lease a few hundred acres to expand production. If I could have met your dad sooner, I could have avoided 10 years of detours. Jack and I each held half of a chilled watermelon, sitting under the big poplar tree by the field, showing off. This time, he didn't retort back, gazing at the blazing sun in the distance, his eyes sparkling, with a bittersweet yet serene smile. If he had met Rocky earlier, Jack's childhood would probably have been much happier, at least like an ordinary child. "Mom, in this life, I only acknowledge you as my mom. Every time others hear that my son has graduated from college, they always compliment me on how young I look." "What are you chatting about that makes you so happy?" Rocky came out of the greenhouse, washed his hands in the bucket, and, seeking comfort, habitually wrapped me in his arms. I scooped a spoonful of watermelon and fed it to him, pushing him away a bit. "It's too hot." "It really is hot, but I want to hold you, Dad." Jack felt like a shining light bulb, his face immediately falling. "Knowing you two have a good relationship. Don't flaunt it in front of single people, okay? I can't deal with this. No one is stopping you from finding someone. Once you pick someone, your dad and I will go propose." I deliberately clucked my tongue. "Jack isn't in a hurry, take your time. It's not like you need someone to help raise kids." With just one sentence, Rocky was left speechless, his face flushed with embarrassment. He chuckled awkwardly and snatched the watermelon from my arms, squatting down to eat. The end. If you like Puppy's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.